Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world that's both fancier and filthier than your aunt's Victorian doily collection. We're talking about being filthy rich in Victorian London. That's right, this is what happens when you combine unlimited wealth, industrial smog, 14 layers of undergarments, and a nationwide fear of fainting in public. Imagine life where your bathtub cost more than your neighbor's house. Your teeth glowed like pearls, if you had them, and you paid actual humans to stand around looking bored just so your hallway felt extra long. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that white noise, and get as comfortable as possible. But let's pause for a second. Did rich Victorians ever touch their own door handles? Did anyone actually enjoy eating jellied eels? Or was that just a prank on the lower classes? Could you survive a day in a mansion where going outside meant sending your butler to check if the air was still hazardous? Would you rather risk tuberculosis or run out of imported French soap? Did people really faint that often, or was it just a national hobby? And what, exactly, did one do with 12 forks at a single meal? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1865, in the heart of London, and you're filthy, stinking rich. There's a servant ironing your newspaper, a chef crafting a 6-course breakfast, and a strange, inexplicable sense that your ancestors expect you to marry your cousin. Let's see if you can survive being at the top, without dying of boredom, embarrassment, or spontaneous corset malfunction. You awake in a bed so large it has its own weather patterns. Sunlight trickles through layers of imported French lace curtains, filtered by a gentle haze of coal smoke. Your first conscious act: summoning a servant to gently cough near the window. Testing the air quality. Will you get up? Or simply send for tea and wait for the housekeeper to alert you that London has finished combusting for the day? You lie there, considering your options. Your duvet, stuffed with the feathers of birds so rare you're not entirely convinced they exist, is heavy enough to keep even the most persistent worries at bay. Somewhere beneath all these covers, your legs have fallen asleep, but it's hardly worth the effort to find out where they've gone. Besides, it's far too early for lower limb engagement. In Victorian London, the true sign of wealth isn't diamonds or deeds. It's never having to move faster than a slow, elegant roll. The air is a complex cocktail, equal parts rosewater, chimney soot, and whatever your neighbour's factory is producing this week. Your lungs ache gently with privilege. Outside, the city growls. Horses clop, milkmen shout, and somewhere, a newsboy is already losing his voice to the morning fog. But inside, your world is soft, serene, and deeply unnecessary. A delicate bell sits at your bedside. Polished so often, it has developed a philosophical dislike of fingerprints. You ring it with the practiced indifference of someone who's never once had to fetch their own breakfast, let alone their own socks. Moments later, your valet glides in, silk shoes, neutral expression, hair parted with architectural precision. He knows the drill. Check your pulse, fluff your pillows, and pretend not to notice your hair is currently auditioning for the role of Victorian haystack. He draws back the curtains with a flourish so dramatic it nearly wakes your ancestral portraits. The room floods with diffused London sunlight, which is to say, a kind of pale grey suggestion of morning, accompanied by the gentle whoosh of soot particles finding their forever home in your nostrils. The air is brisk, which in Victorian code means only lightly poisonous. Would sir like to rise? Your valet inquires, already arranging your slippers by the bedside. You contemplate this. On one hand, rising means facing the terrifying prospect of your own reflection. Nothing says privilege like bedhead sculpted by 12 hours of tossing atop a 1,000 thread count pillow. On the other, if you stay in bed any longer, there's a small chance you'll be mistaken for one of the marble statues in the hallway. You opt for compromise. Tea. Immediately. The best defense against decision-making is a cup of something that costs more than your entire childhood home. The footman returns moments later with a silver tray bearing tea so fragrant it nearly overpowers the background aroma of Industrial Revolution. Sugar? Naturally. You take enough to ensure your dentist's children will one day attend Oxford. While you sip, the housekeeper arrives for the morning briefing. Her hair is wound tighter than your nerves, and she brings a notebook the size of a small boulder. "Good morning, sir." The outside temperature is described as unforgiving. The street is currently clear of peddlers, and the stables have only suffered 2 minor horse-related incidents. I have scheduled breakfast for a time that is both fashionable and maximally inconvenient for everyone else in the house. You nod, relieved to have dodged the burden of meaningful choice. The morning paper, already ironed flat by a dedicated under-butler, is handed to you. The headlines are the usual: scandal, fog, another mysterious disappearance involving a fishmonger and the Earl of Sandwich. You skim the stories, careful not to crumple the page. Bad luck, they say, to ruffle the news before noon. All around you, the house awakens. A faint clatter from the kitchen. The distant shriek of a parlour maid discovering an escaped canary. The heavy tread of the butler as he inspects the silverware for signs of existential despair. Every sound is a reassuring reminder. You are surrounded, coddled, insulated from the outside world by layers of servants, draperies, and upper-class denial. Eventually, you rise. You allow yourself to be draped in a dressing gown, so soft it probably counts as a controlled substance. You cross the room, slowly, regally, as befits someone who has never once stubbed a toe unsupervised. The first steps of the day are always the most important, or at least, the most likely to be witnessed by someone who will judge your posture for the rest of their natural life. As you stand there, tea in hand, breathing in silk and smog, you realize it's exhausting being this well-rested. But if surviving Victorian luxury is wrong, you're not sure you ever want to be right. You consider fainting for dramatic effect, but settle for another sip instead. It's going to be a long, comfortable, extravagantly unnecessary day. Getting dressed is not a solo sport. It's an Olympic event involving at least 3 humans, 12 buttons, a shoehorn, and an emergency-smelling salts kit. Your valet or lady's maid skillfully navigates the obstacle course of corsets, cravats, and petticoats, making sure you look presentable for breakfast and not like you've just lost a fight with your wardrobe. Your morning begins with the faintest rustle of starched linen and the gentle, determined footsteps of your personal dressing squad. The ritual is performed in a dressing room so elaborate it has its own acoustics and possibly its own microclimate. One corner is always 2 degrees colder, for reasons no one understands. You are not expected to lift a finger. In fact, attempting to button your own shirt would be considered an act of social rebellion, or possibly a sign of madness. First comes the removal of your night clothes, a process requiring modesty screens, synchronized choreography, and a team of attendants who have mastered the art of polite invisibility. Your dressing gown is whisked away, replaced by a series of mysterious undergarments whose sole purpose appears to be adding both layers and confusion. You stand with arms slightly akimbo, as if auditioning for the role of bewildered coat rack, while the experts get to work. For the gentleman, your valet begins by expertly wielding the stiffest, starchiest shirt ever created by human hands, a shirt that crackles when touched and requires more ironing than a 5-star hotel's entire linen closet. Buttons, buttons, everywhere. On the cuffs, up the front, hidden inside mysterious flaps and false fronts. Your waistcoat is presented as though it's the Shroud of Turin, followed by a cravat starched into a shape last seen in advanced geometry textbooks. The application of the cravat alone takes longer than the average modern commute and requires enough pins to trigger airport security. For the ladies, the ordeal is even more interactive. Your lady's maid appears armed with the Holy Trinity: corset, chemise, and petticoats. You hold the bedpost for dear life as she begins the time-honored tradition of lacing, pulling, and encouraging your organs to make new friends. The goal is to create an hourglass silhouette. The side effect is an hour's worth of shallow breathing and spontaneous existential crises. On especially ambitious mornings, your corset is so tight you can hear your ancestors weeping in solidarity. Next, layer upon layer of petticoats and underskirts, each designed to add volume, modesty, and about 30 degrees of additional warmth. If you're lucky, today's dress only requires minor negotiation with the laws of physics to fasten the back buttons. Ribbons, laces, and tiny hooks seem to multiply like rabbits, and your maid's hands are a blur of competence and suppressed judgment. There's always that one accessory, be it a shoe, a glove, or a decorative brooch, that resists all efforts at domestication. The shoehorn comes out, sometimes accompanied by the aforementioned smelling salts, just in case you lose consciousness during the more strenuous phases. Gloves are wriggled on with a combination of prayer and perspiration, and hats are pinned at angles calculated to suggest effortless grace, rather than four people frantically negotiating with gravity. Throughout this process, the room fills with a light misting of perfume or cologne, designed to mask both body odor and the underlying panic that you might be late for breakfast. Hair is brushed, curled, or sculpted according to the latest Parisian fashion, always one season ahead and 3 headaches behind. If you're male, a dab of pomade and a moustache combing session is non-negotiable. If you're female, you hope your hair doesn't collapse like a poorly built soufflé before luncheon. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the gilded mirror, somehow both regal and slightly overwhelmed. The outfit is an architectural achievement, constructed from 20 separate pieces and the shared hope that you won't need the bathroom anytime soon. Your team steps back, admiring their handiwork as if unveiling a new public monument. You thank them, or at least make a non-committal grunt, and are gently guided out of the dressing room. As you totter away on shoes engineered for style rather than movement, you realize it's still only 9 a.m. The day is young, your outfit is pristine, and your personal dignity is, temporarily, intact. You are ready for breakfast, or at least as ready as anyone wearing a personal scaffolding of whalebone, linen, and social anxiety can be. But remember, surviving Victorian fashion is like surviving Victorian life, a group project you never signed up for, with rules no one actually understands. At least you look the part. Breakfast isn't just a meal, it's an architectural marvel stacked on silver platters. There are eggs from France, ham from Yorkshire, and a baffling assortment of jellies, jams, and things in aspic. You nibble delicately, trying not to overexert yourself before noon, while your doctor stands nearby in case you attempt to eat a vegetable. This is not your hurried, modern grab a coffee and go scenario. No one's running late to anything, except maybe the grave, and that's mostly due to the bacon. In a proper Victorian house, breakfast begins with a parade. The footman sets the table as if he's about to launch a naval fleet. The butler stands at attention like he's awaiting a royal inspection, and somewhere in the background, the kitchen staff are locked in mortal combat with a soufflé. The table is a battleground of cutlery. There are forks for fish, forks for meat, spoons for porridge, spoons for jam, tongs for sugar cubes, and at least 3 mysterious implements whose actual use has been lost to time. Each guest is confronted with more silverware than actual problems, which, in Victorian society, is saying something. You select a utensil and hope you've guessed right. Using the wrong one is not a crime, but you may as well have started the French Revolution in the dining room. You start with fruit, naturally, because nothing says I am rich and healthy like nibbling on an orange that was imported at a cost roughly equivalent to a year's rent for your average London family. The fruit is sliced into geometric patterns that defy physics and common sense, served in a bowl so delicate it probably faints if you look at it too hard. Next comes the porridge course, a hearty, steaming bowl that is technically meant for sustenance, but in reality is an opportunity to showcase how much cream and sugar one can fit in a single dish. Your fellow diners debate the finer points of oat saucing, with one relative swearing by Scottish oats and another quietly sulking, convinced Irish oats are superior. The conversation is polite, but beneath the surface, you sense the quiet tension that only comes from generational grain feuds. After that, it's time for a parade of hot dishes. There's ham, thick cut and gleaming with glaze. There are sausages, eggs poached to perfection and arranged in delicate rows. The kippers arrive, smoked to a level that would make a modern smoke alarm give up out of respect. The butler carves everything with surgical precision while the household dog, bred exclusively to look wistful near food, makes his daily rounds beneath the table. If you're thinking vegetables might make an appearance, think again. The closest you'll get is a tomato, sliced so thin it's technically a rumor. Your personal physician, stationed nearby in a chair that might as well be a throne, arches an eyebrow if you reach for anything green. He's seen what happens to the last person who ate spinach at breakfast. You ignore his judgment and instead focus on the next course. A teetering tower of pastries. There are croissants so flaky they disintegrate at the mention of humidity, tarts with crusts that could double as architectural supports, and something called tipsy cake, which is basically an excuse to have brandy before 10 a.m. The jams and jellies are equally extravagant. There's blackcurrant from Devon, damson from Kent, and a marmalade so bitter it once started a family feud. Everything is served in ornate crystal jars that reflect the morning sun with all the subtlety of a lighthouse. Throughout this, conversation floats lightly, never touching on anything as distressing as politics or the stock market before noon. Instead, you discuss the weather, the health of the Queen's favourite corgi, and whether Lord Windermere's new moustache wax is a revolution or a disaster. The air smells of toast, coffee, gossip, and impending gout. As the meal winds down, you find yourself strangely exhausted. It's not even 10 a.m., and you've survived more courses than most people's entire day. You dab your lips, thank the staff, and vow, quietly, to never eat again. At least until luncheon. Every move you make is watched by an entire staff who exist to anticipate your every need and judge your choice of hat. The butler polishes the silver with a cloth finer than your hair. The housekeeper rules with an iron fist, and somewhere a footman is rehearsing how to stand absolutely still for 6 hours without blinking. Owning a Victorian mansion isn't just about marble staircases or imported wallpaper. It's about logistics. You are not so much a homeowner as you are the head of a living, breathing, occasionally mutinous human ecosystem. Your life is so carefully managed that if you ever attempted to make your own toast, 3 generations of footmen would faint and the butler would retire on the spot. Let's start at the top of the pecking order. The butler. He is less a man, more a walking, talking, extremely polite shadow government. He knows everything. Where the good china is hidden, the exact temperature for sherry, and precisely how many times your cousin Winifred visited last year for tea. His eyebrows alone can communicate disappointment more efficiently than the telegraph. The butler is everywhere and nowhere, his shoes somehow never making a sound, his presence always slightly intimidating. If you ever find yourself tempted to pour your own wine, remember, somewhere, the butler is watching, probably taking notes for his memoirs. Next, the housekeeper. She is the undisputed monarch of the downstairs realm, commanding a battalion of maids with the organizational precision of a military campaign. Her keys jingle ominously, and she has the unique ability to appear in any room just as you're about to do something embarrassing. Nothing escapes her notice. Wrinkled linens, poorly dusted picture frames, or that time the scullery maid tried to hide a broken teacup behind the asparagus boiler. If the butler manages your reputation, the housekeeper manages your dignity, armed with a notebook, a steely gaze, and a schedule written in a code only she understands. Then there are the footmen, each one selected for his impressive height, symmetrical features, and ability to stand so still that guests occasionally mistake them for very expensive furniture. Their uniforms are pristine, their shoes mirror-shined, and their main task is to look decorative while carrying trays, opening doors, and, most importantly, never letting the family cat escape during a dinner party. Footmen aspire to one day become a butler, but for now, their lives revolve around carrying things, dusting things, and learning the ancient art of pretending to care deeply about finger sandwiches. In the kitchen, life is a constant, flour-dusted whirlwind. The cook rules with a wooden spoon, barking orders at the undercooks and muttering dire warnings about anyone daring to peek at the soufflé. The scullery maid, lowest of the low, is up before dawn scrubbing pans large enough to bathe a small horse. The kitchen is both a battlefield and a comedy. There is always a fire to stoke, a pudding to save, or a crisis involving the goose. Let's not forget the other specialists. The governess, underappreciated and overeducated, she floats around like a ghost in sensible shoes, teaching your children French and how not to be embarrassing in public. The gardener, more mud than man, the stable boy, the laundry maid, and the lady's maid or valet. Each has a role so specific and vital that if one vanished, the entire household might collapse into a pile of unpressed shirts and confused hedges. And then there's you, the pampered, silk-robed sun around which this entire galaxy orbits. Your job is to glide serenely from room to room, trailing the faint scent of privilege and pretending not to hear the frantic whispers as the staff debates whether your breakfast egg was 2 degrees overcooked. Every action, no matter how trivial, is anticipated. Your shoes appear by the door, your tea arrives at just the right temperature, and if you so much as frown at a curtain, someone will immediately launch an investigation into its emotional well-being. Modern life might have personal assistants, but only the Victorians had an entire army at their disposal. And while you enjoy the ease of never having to find your own umbrella, never forget, the true power in your household lies below stairs, holding a feather duster, a ledger, and always a few choice opinions about your new hat. Cleanliness is next to godliness. But in Victorian London, it's also a competitive sport. You submit yourself to an elaborate sequence of lotions, powders, and questionable home remedies. Your hair is curled, your face is whitened, and your hands are gently exfoliated with what you hope is soap and not ground-up bones. The first step of the morning toilette is simply surviving the onslaught of scents. Your dressing table is less a piece of furniture and more a chemical weapons laboratory. Bottles of rose water, vials of lavender oil, jars of cold cream, and mysterious unmarked tins brought home by relatives from the continent. The maid arranges them with reverence, as if any one of them might contain the secret to eternal youth, or at the very least, to not smelling like yesterday's coal fire. For the men, the routine starts with a splash of water, so cold it could probably be sold as a health tonic in modern times. You grit your teeth as you brave the wash basin, which is brisk, bracing, and immediately followed by a brisk rub with a towel that's seen better centuries. Shaving is an ordeal. Your valet arrives armed with a straight razor, a brush, and enough shaving soap to lather a rugby team. He wields the razor with all the solemnity of a surgeon, fully aware that a distracted moment could leave you with a facial expression best described as permanently surprised. Afterward, a generous dousing of cologne not only masks the lingering scent of fear, but could probably double as a disinfectant. For the ladies, the process is even more complicated and longer than some marriages. The centerpiece is the ritualistic application of face powder, which transforms your complexion from "I haven't seen the sun in 3 months" to "I may in fact be made of porcelain." This is followed by the strategic use of rouge, applied with a delicate touch that suggests you just returned from a very genteel fainting spell. Eyebrows are gently coaxed into submission, lips are tinted with the faintest hint of color, lest you be mistaken for someone who actually enjoys things. And the entire face is dusted until it's as smooth as the family silver, just as fragile and nearly as expensive. Hairstyling is another competitive sport, involving curlers, irons heated over an open flame, and enough pins to trigger airport security a century in advance. The goal is to achieve effortless curls that say, "I spent hours looking like this," even if the actual result is more "I lost a fight with a hedgerow." For men, the ideal is a sleek, side-parted style held in place with pomade so strong that if a gale swept through the city, your hair would remain utterly unfazed. No toilette is complete without a generous application of perfume. Victorian perfumes are bold and occasionally hazardous. Powerful blends of floral, citrus, or even musky notes designed to overpower anything the city's sewer system can throw at you. If you can still smell yourself by the end, you're simply not trying hard enough. Of course, all this beauty requires clean hands. Here, soap is both friend and foe. Some soaps are pure luxury, fragrant, gentle, imported from France. Others are gritty experiments made by your aunt's cousin's neighbor, containing who knows what. Is that oatmeal or something more sinister? You ponder this as your maid gently scrubs your fingers, intent on erasing any hint you've ever touched anything rougher than a silk ribbon. To finish, you slip on your jewelry, your watch, or perhaps a cameo pin of a relative you're only 60% sure isn't a myth. Final touches are inspected in the mirror. One last swipe of powder, a twist of a curl, the softest sigh of relief that, for now, you look like a member of your own social class. Outside, the city is grimy and relentless. Inside, you are a walking, fragrant, possibly slightly toxic masterpiece. The toilette is finally done, and you're ready to emerge into society, a radiant product of discipline, vanity, and the absolute best that modern chemistry has to offer. And all this before breakfast. You stroll into the drawing room, a place specifically designed for not drawing anything. Here, you perform the morning ritual of reading letters aloud, sipping tea, and pretending to be interested in your cousin's new spoon collection. If you're feeling daring, you might even attempt a conversation that's not about the weather. The drawing room is a curious invention. A plush, sunlit expanse of carefully arranged chairs, stiff settees, and tables covered in so many antimacassars, you're not sure if you're allowed to sit or if you're about to participate in a Victorian tablecloth appreciation society. Every surface sparkles, every cushion has been plumped by a maid with Olympic-level forearm strength, and somewhere in the corner, a bored cocker spaniel is wondering how it ended up in a room where no one ever throws a ball. This is where you face your most delicate challenge yet, the morning social parade. One by one, family members and overnight guests filter in, looking as though they, too, spent their morning being sandpapered by corsets and expectations. Each greets you with a nod that suggests both great affection and mild suspicion. After all, you did eat the last marmalade tart at breakfast. You claim your seat, a velvet chair that is both too deep and too narrow, and survey the scene. There is your aunt, already knitting a scarf for someone she's never met, your uncle, half asleep behind a newspaper the size of a small tent, and of course, Cousin Agatha, who is absolutely desperate to talk about her latest hobby, collecting rare and unsettlingly pointy spoons. Tea is brought in, accompanied by a tray of biscuits so dry they may have been baked during the previous monarch's reign. The footman pours with the solemnity of a man defusing a bomb, and you accept your cup with the grace of someone who knows that spilling on the carpet is punishable by at least 3 decades of family stories about that time you ruined the rug. The conversation, as always, starts with the weather. There are only so many ways to discuss persistent damp before even the wallpaper starts looking bored. Still, it's safer than wandering into dangerous conversational territory. like politics, or your cousin's brief and tragic engagement to a baronet with suspicious sideburns. Today, though, you're feeling adventurous. You venture a comment about the latest musical performance in town, hoping someone else attended and can supply details so you don't have to admit you left halfway through for a more thrilling engagement with a plate of scones. The gamble pays off. Your uncle launches into a detailed review that is, mercifully, only half as long as the actual concert. Letters are next. A vital part of the morning ritual. The correspondence arrives in a silver tray, already sorted by importance, weight, and potential for scandal. You read aloud the highlights: a wedding invitation from a third cousin, a thank you note for a gift you don't remember sending, and a cryptic postcard from someone traveling on the continent, translation, possibly hiding from creditors. Each note is discussed, dissected, and, where necessary, gently mocked. Between sips of tea and spoon updates, you scan the drawing room for escape routes. The piano beckons from the far wall, dusted and tuned, ready for its daily role as both entertainment and background noise. If things get truly desperate, you may offer to play a quick piece, secure in the knowledge that no one actually wants to listen. It's the Victorian equivalent of checking your phone during awkward silences. As the hour advances, conversation grows livelier. Someone mentions a scandal involving the neighbor's peacock, and suddenly everyone is engaged. There's a burst of laughter, a spillage of tea, onto a doily, fortunately, and the brief, rare sensation of genuine fun before someone remembers they're due at the milliner's for a hat fitting. The drawing room parade comes to a gentle close as guests drift off to their next engagements. You linger a moment, savoring the hush, the fading scent of bergamot, and the knowledge that you survived another round of polite society, armed only with a smile, a steady hand, and a deep, unshakable indifference to spoons. You are, after all, a master of the morning social arts. Or at least, you look the part. Your breakfast is interrupted by an avalanche of invitations, delivered on hand-engraved stationery so heavy it could double as a weapon. Every letter is a social landmine. One wrong RSVP and you're banished to the outer fringes of the social galaxy. Somewhere between that scandal with the sherry and the great mustache incident of '62, the footman appears, arms trembling beneath a stack of creamy envelopes embossed in gold and sealed with enough wax to waterproof a small canoe. He deposits them onto your plate with the reverence of a man handling priceless artifacts, then vanishes before you can ask if he knows how to read hieroglyphics. Each invitation is a coded challenge, written in curlicued script that requires a magnifying glass, a classical education, and possibly a séance to decipher. The first envelope is from Lady Featherstone, she of the triple-barrel surname and legendary soirees. She invites you to an evening of light musical entertainment and moderate refreshments, which, translated from Victorian, means a 6-hour piano marathon and finger sandwiches, so tiny they're technically theoretical. Your presence is earnestly desired. You wonder if declining will lead to a drop in your standing on the unspoken London social stock exchange, or if you'll merely be exiled to the table near the window, where the draught is strong and the gossip is weak. Another envelope, larger and possibly armoured, comes from Lord Puddlemire, who is hosting a small but select gathering to discuss the issue of municipal drainage. You know from experience that small means packed, select means anyone who owns a waistcoat, and drainage means at least 2 hours of listening to men argue about sewers over tepid sherry. You mentally note, must invent an urgent dental emergency for that evening. The invitations keep coming. Garden parties, art unveilings, charitable teas for causes ranging from orphaned hedgehogs to the Society for the Prevention of Unfashionable Bonnets. Each card bristles with expectation. Will you attend the ball at the Standishes, where the last time you went, you got trapped in a conservatory with a wax figure and 3 drunk poets? Or do you dare skip it and risk being cut from their annual distribution of marmalade? RSVPing is less about attendance and more about strategy. Each response is a tiny chess move in the relentless game of social survival. Accept too many, and you risk being seen as desperate for invitations, a fate only slightly less embarrassing than running out of calling cards. Decline too many, and suddenly the best you can hope for is an invitation to Cousin Edgar's annual toast and turnip night, which is exactly as bleak as it sounds. For this, you need your social secretary, a person whose sole job is to remember who is feuding with whom, which house has better canapés, and which gatherings ended last year with the police discreetly called. Together, you wade through the stack, weighing options like a general preparing for battle. Tea with the Duchess of Strathmore? Only if you can sit far from her parrot, who has never forgiven you for wearing purple. The artist's salon in Soho? Only if someone promises not to bring up the nude scandal again. All of this is before you even consider the handwriting required. Declining must be phrased in a way that is both effusive and evasive, regretting your prior engagement with great disappointment, even if that engagement is a solo evening with a good book and no human contact. Accepting, meanwhile, must sound enthusiastic but not overeager, and above all, must never hint that you are coming for the food. The real risk, of course, is forgetting to reply altogether. That's how people end up accidentally cut from guest lists, gossiped about behind fans, or worst of all, bumped to the infamous category of people we invite only when someone else cancels. One day you're at the center of society. The next you're watching from the sidelines with the other RSVP casualties, sharing a cold scone and 1,000-yard stare. In the end, you manage to reply to most invitations, skillfully juggling alliances, obligations, and a mild dread of public speaking. You've survived the morning post, with your social status, at least for now, intact. All you need now is a strong cup of tea, and the hope that next week's invitations come with fewer opportunities to disgrace yourself over the punch bowl. Ready for a little fresh air, you step into your carriage, a rolling living room with wheels. The ride is a slow-motion stampede through a city so congested that moving 5 feet requires a complex negotiation with 8 other carriages, 6 chimney sweeps, and 1 very stubborn goose. The only thing thicker than the smog is the sense of self-importance. You sink into the velvet seat, surrounded by polished wood, tasseled curtains, and the faint, comforting aroma of old leather and anxiety. Outside, the horses snort impatiently, already regretting their life choices, while your coachman perches on the box seat, cracking his whip with a flourish that says, "I once dreamed of being a pirate." The footman, meanwhile, is on the back step, tasked with opening the door at precisely the right moment and glaring menacingly at anyone who comes within sniffing distance of your wheels. Victorian London's streets are a swirling mass of chaos, part obstacle course, part street theatre. The moment your carriage leaves the drive, you're locked in a battle of wills with the neighbouring landau, whose owner is determined not to cede a single inch, even if it means both of you spend half an hour glaring across a puddle. Pedestrians swarm with the casual fearlessness of people who have never heard the phrase right of way, darting between wheels, dogs, and the occasional errant chicken. The traffic is, in a word, biblical. Delivery carts stacked with vegetables lean at precarious angles, flower girls hawk their wares with lungs that could power a factory, and somewhere, a vendor is selling questionable oysters to men who should really know better. Children dart past in packs, somehow always managing to escape being trampled, while a troop of soldiers marches by, adding drums and confusion to the general soundtrack. As you jostle along, the city's soundtrack washes over you, the clip-clop of horses' hooves on cobblestones, the calls of street vendors, and the constant, determined bickering of coachmen. Every so often, someone calls out a greeting, and your coachman is forced to tip his hat with the world-weary elegance of a man who knows he'll have to tip it at least 40 more times before luncheon. Then there's the smog. Oh, the glorious, throat-coating, eye-watering soup of London's finest. Your carriage windows are carefully cracked, letting in just enough air to remind you that fresh is a relative term. Occasionally, the fog is so thick you wonder if you've accidentally entered someone's parlor. Your handkerchief, once pristine, now looks like it's been used to sweep a chimney, which, given the state of things, is always a possibility. Your journey isn't just about getting from point A to point B, it's a display of status. The carriage itself is a statement, a glittering, rolling resume of your place in society. Your wheels gleam, your crest is polished, and if all goes well, at least one envious onlooker will whisper, "That's the Blenkinsop carriage, you know? The one with the walnut inlays and the suspiciously French driver." If you're feeling bold, you might even lower the window and wave, risking both social envy and immediate bronchitis. Inside the carriage, you pass the time with carefully curated boredom. You leaf through a magazine, pretend to read correspondence, or simply stare pensively out the window, like a minor royal awaiting abdication. Occasionally, you exchange knowing glances with passing acquaintances, the kind of silent communication that says, "We are both stuck here, but at least we're stuck here stylishly." Eventually, you reach your destination, a little rumpled, slightly sooty, and very aware that you've spent the last half hour traveling at roughly the speed of evolution. The footman springs into action, flinging open the door with all the ceremony of a coronation, and you step out into the street with the poise of someone who has absolutely not been arguing with a goose in their head for the last 15 minutes. Because in Victorian London, every carriage ride is an adventure, a daily test of patience, social maneuvering, and clean laundry. And above all, a chance to be seen. For men, the club is a sanctuary of cigars, secret handshakes, and incomprehensible card games. For women, it's the ladies' society, a pastel battlefield of compliments disguised as insults. Either way, you're here to trade gossip, secure alliances, and, if you're lucky, catch a glimpse of someone's scandalously bare ankles. Let's begin with the gentleman's club, which is neither as exciting nor as illicit as modern imaginations might suggest. You enter a world cocooned in dark mahogany, thick carpets, and enough tobacco smoke to fuel the Industrial Revolution single-handedly. The air buzzes with the soft clink of brandy glasses and the gentle rustle of newspapers held at defensive angles. Conversation is strictly regulated. Politics are discussed with grave nods and occasional grunts, while personal feelings are left at the door, along with any sense of sunlight or fresh air. There are rituals here, practiced for generations. You must know precisely how to fold the Times to avoid scandal, how to light a cigar without singeing your moustache, and when to laugh politely at the chairman's joke about foreign cheese. Card games are always in progress: whist, baccarat, something involving 12 dice and the tears of under-butlers. No one really knows the rules, but everyone pretends. Losing gracefully is an art. Winning is considered bad form. If you do find yourself on a winning streak, you are expected to apologize and buy everyone another round, preferably without collapsing from the shock of your own good luck. But the real currency here is gossip, softly traded across armchairs, passed from ear to ear, never written down and always slightly exaggerated. Did you hear about Lord Merryweather's disastrous speech? Was it true that Colonel Witherspoon was seen walking his dog without a hat? Was that even legal? In a world where one's reputation is the only thing more fragile than the port decanter, gossip is both weapon and shield. If you're a woman, your battleground is the ladies' society, which at first glance appears to be a tranquil assembly of embroidery, cakes, and pastel ribbons. Do not be fooled. Here, alliances are forged and broken with a single raised eyebrow. Compliments are barbed and delivered with surgical precision. "My dear, what a charming dress. I never would have thought to wear that color." The stakes are high. One misstep, and you'll find yourself exiled to the refreshment table, feigning interest in lukewarm lemonade and questionable fruitcake. The conversation is rapid fire and coded. "How is your husband's health?" means, "We all heard about his unfortunate incident with the mayor's horse." Is your daughter still engaged? Translates to, the betting pool in the parlor says, she won't make it to Christmas. Every sentence is a test. Every smile, a potential trap. There is always someone knitting in the corner, pretending not to listen, but, in fact, storing every syllable for later weaponization. Beneath the surface, both club and society are about more than leisure. They're about survival, a daily dance of power, influence, and occasionally cake theft. The men scheme to place friends in the right government office. The women arrange marriages, steer fortunes, and orchestrate charity balls with the ruthlessness of military generals. Information is everything, and loyalty is always up for renegotiation, especially if there are tickets to the theatre at stake. And of course, there's always the hope of a little scandal. The smallest slip, a mismatched glove, a vanished necklace, a hint of romantic intrigue, will ripple through the clubs and societies of London within hours, distorted, embroidered, and replayed in every drawing room from Mayfair to the East End. By the time you emerge from your club or society, your mind is spinning with names, whispered secrets, and the vague suspicion that someone has just arranged for you to host a dinner party you never agreed to. The social game is relentless, the rules unwritten, and the rewards fleeting. But you have survived. You have exchanged news, traded jokes, sidestepped disaster, and, if you're very lucky, caught that rarest of glimpses, someone's bare ankle, scandalously displayed beneath a frill of lace. And that, in Victorian London, is a victory worth savouring. Shopping isn't just about buying things. It's about being seen buying things. Bond Street is lined with shops selling everything you don't need at prices designed to keep the poor safely outside. You browse the latest in hats, gloves, and questionable medical devices, while your maid quietly calculates how long she could survive if she pawned your umbrella. The trip to Bond Street is as much a performance as it is an errand. You sweep from shop to shop like a minor royal on tour, trailing a small entourage of staff and admirers, and possibly a dog that has no idea how it got there. Every bow and curtsy you receive is carefully calibrated according to your rank, your hat, and whether you tipped well at Christmas. Storefronts glisten in the diffused London light. Windows dressed with feathered bonnets, diamond brooches, and the kind of shoes designed to collapse at the sight of a puddle. Shopkeepers hover behind glass counters, ready to provide an endless stream of polite encouragement and unsolicited advice. Oh yes, madam. That bonnet is exceptionally flattering, on a face so refined. Sir, may I recommend this cane? It's mahogany, with a secret compartment for laudanum and a backup monocle. Shopping here is not about acquiring, it's about ascending the social ladder. One extravagant and thoroughly unnecessary purchase at a time. You begin in the milliner's shop, where hats are displayed on heads so elegantly blank you suspect they might be practicing for a career in portraiture. There are bonnets with enough ribbons to strangle a small dog, top hats so tall they pose an actual threat to chandeliers, and veils for all seasons, rain, sun, and, presumably, existential dread. You try on a few, nodding seriously at your reflection, while your maid does her best to remain neutral about the one that makes you look like a surprised pheasant. Next, the glove emporium, a world of buttery leather and silent judgment. The shop assistant assesses your hands with the gravity of a surgeon, presenting gloves by the dozen. Kid leather, lambskin, suede. Some are so tight you wonder if you'll ever remove them again. Others so loose you could smuggle a side of beef inside. The sales pitch is always the same. Indispensable for the social season, madam, and a favourite of Her Royal Highness. You quietly wonder if Her Royal Highness ever has to remove her own gloves, or if she simply molts once a year. Then, the chemist. This is where Victorian optimism truly shines. Shelves groaning with miracle cures and tonics of wildly varying legality. There's a jar of tooth powder that promises to restore the natural glow of the pre-industrial mouth. Cough syrups containing more opium than sense, and the latest in personal hygiene devices that may or may not have been designed by a mad scientist. This elixir, sir, will cure melancholy, gout, and possibly the desire to shop further. You buy 2 bottles, just in case. Throughout it all, the maid shadows you, arms full of parcels, casting longing glances at the jewelry counter and mentally calculating the black market value of your purchases. She knows the drill. Keep the change purse in sight, the shopping list in hand, and one eye on the silver-handled umbrella, just in case fortune calls for a quick escape. Of course, half the reason for shopping on Bond Street is to be seen. As you exit one shop and enter the next, you nod to acquaintances, exchange brief pleasantries, and submit to the intense scrutiny of rivals and frenemies. Did you see Lady Ashworth's new muff? Shocking, really. And what was Lord Elphinstone doing in the perfumery? He's been banned since the Great Cologne incident. By the time you reach the final stop, perhaps the confectioner, where sweets are wrapped like precious stones and cost about the same, your arms are loaded with packages, your wallet is lighter, and your social standing is ever so slightly improved. You have not merely shopped, you have performed, competed, and, if the hat fits, triumphed. The maid breathes a sigh of relief as you announce the end of your expedition. You step out into the bustle, your hat askew, your hands gloved, and your dignity more or less intact. Another successful campaign in the endless battle of Victorian retail therapy. Luncheon is a midday feast designed to tide you over until the next, slightly larger feast. The menu includes gelatinous fish, tiny sandwiches with mysterious fillings, and salads that are mostly decorative. Conversation is equally light, unless someone brings up politics, at which point the room may need to be aired out. The table is set with military precision. Silver gleams under the soft sunlight, reflected from a chandelier that, like most things in your home, is there primarily to be dusted. Each guest is confronted by 3 forks, 2 knives, a spoon the size of a shovel, and a plate so dainty it might faint at the sight of a real meal. The bread arrives first, perfectly sliced, perfectly bland, and placed with reverence onto plates by the footman, who's trained in the ancient art of not making eye contact with anyone holding butter. Luncheon begins with a consommé so clear you can see your own disappointment reflected in it. The soup is sipped in polite silence. No one slurps. Slurping is for the continent. And you are a pillar of English restraint. You move on to the next course. Perhaps a gelatinous mound of fish that wobbles nervously, as if aware it's about to be prodded with a monogrammed fork. The aspic glistens, the color of ambition, and exactly as nutritious. Someone pokes it experimentally, and the entire table leans in, united by curiosity and mild fear. Then come the sandwiches. They are the architectural marvels of the meal, stacked 3 high crusts meticulously trimmed, filled with ingredients that may or may not exist outside the Victorian imagination. Cress, potted shrimp, something called deviled ham, which you suspect is just regular ham with a better publicist. You eat these in 2 bites, or 1 if you're feeling rebellious. The trick is to never be caught with your mouth full when your great-aunt Matilda asks you a direct question about your prospects. Salad appears in a cut glass bowl, arranged so artistically you hesitate to disturb it. There are 3 leaves of lettuce, a tomato slice, whisper thin, and perhaps a radish carved into the shape of a swan. You move the greens around your plate, pretending to eat while engaging in the time-honored tradition of not actually eating. No one in Victorian London has ever finished an entire luncheon salad. And you're not about to be the first. Conversation sparkles, light and insubstantial as a meringue. Topics include the weather, unseasonably moist, the merits of a recent concert, the cellist was quite bold, and the curious fate of Lord Dither's peacocks, still missing, possibly eloped. If anyone mentions politics, there is an immediate outbreak of coughing, glass polishing, and, if things get truly dire, a hasty retreat to the garden for air. After the main event comes pudding, which is never as cheerful as it sounds. Spotted Dick, blancmange, and the ever-popular syllabub make their appearance. Each is served with a dollop of something so rich you consider sending it a thank you note. The footman appears with a selection of cheeses and fruit, but by now, everyone is conserving energy for the next meal. Throughout luncheon, you must remain vigilant. Drink too much sherry, and you'll be remembered for all the wrong reasons. Laugh too loudly, and someone will make a note in their social diary. Faint at the table, a time-honored tradition if the corsets are particularly vengeful that day, and you risk being immortalized in family legend as the one who swooned during the salad course. At last, the meal draws to a close. Napkins are folded, compliments are paid to the cook via the butler, and guests drift away, already dreaming of tea. You leave the table feeling neither full nor hungry, but grateful that you've survived another round of Victorian culinary roulette. After all, luncheon isn't about sustenance. It's a test of manners, a feat of endurance, and above all, a rehearsal for dinner, a slightly grander, even more absurd affair lurking just a few hours away. In the afternoon, you're expected to do good works, which mostly involves attending charity luncheons and discussing the plight of the poor without accidentally meeting any of them. You might sew a handkerchief, sponsor a child, or donate precisely one old hat. It's exhausting being benevolent. Charity, in Victorian London, is both a pastime and a performance. You change into your philanthropic outfit, tasteful, modest, and not so new as to be considered flashy. The goal is to look compassionate but not competitive, pious but still superior. Your carriage rolls you to a grand townhouse where the drawing room is filled with the cream of society, all gathered to discuss poverty over scones that cost more than a week's wages in the East End. As you enter, a wave of faint lavender and social anxiety washes over you. The hostess greets you with a determined smile, her cheeks flushed from equal parts civic pride and the exertion of arranging 200 mismatched chairs. The room is abuzz with earnest conversation. Ladies debating the plight of chimney sweeps with the same vigor they use to discuss millinery trends, gentlemen murmuring about the worthy poor, while making certain the refreshments aren't being depleted by the unworthy rich. A table in the corner is stacked with donations, dozens of handkerchiefs, carefully stitched by those who wouldn't know a runny nose if it introduced itself, and an entire mountain of gently used hats. There is always a moment where you must describe, in detail, the backstory of your hat donation. This one saw me through the great rained-on garden party of '58. Charity, after all, is as much about the narrative as the need. Next comes the business of sponsoring children. A sign-up sheet is passed around, decorated with sentimental illustrations of wide-eyed orphans and hopeful newsboys. You select a name at random, promising to provide boots, schooling, and, crucially, a signed photograph of yourself for moral support. There's an unspoken contest over whose child is the most photogenic, as everyone quietly hopes for an adorable letter of thanks to display at the next charity tea. After the pledges are made, the real work begins, the hands-on portion of the afternoon, which generally involves sewing circles. You join a group of ladies determinedly embroidering flannel petticoats, each stitch a testament to both goodwill and the desire to keep up appearances. Conversation meanders from the latest sermons on Christian duty to whether Mrs. Catamol's fruitcake contains actual fruit this year, to the perennial worry that one might accidentally prick a finger and bleed all over the good intentions. From time to time, the gathering is interrupted by a guest speaker, a clergyman with the complexion of boiled ham and a gift for statistics, or a matron who recently toured the slums in person from the comfort of a locked carriage. Everyone listens dutifully, occasionally dabbing at their eyes with monogrammed hankies. The idea of encountering actual poor people is both thrilling and terrifying. Like being asked to perform at the Royal Albert Hall after only one piano lesson. After tea, there is the charitable raffle, a chance to win an ornamental basket or, this year, a statuette of Florence Nightingale. Winners are announced with much fanfare, though everyone secretly hopes not to win the potted fern, a notorious dud that has outlived 3 previous raffle cycles. As the afternoon fades, you gather your things, a little weary from all the virtue. You've given, pledged, and most importantly, been seen giving and pledging. On your way out, You exchange one last round of polite encouragement, then climb into your carriage, satisfied that you've done your bit to save the world, preferably from a safe and well-upholstered distance. In Victorian London, charity is a social institution, a networking opportunity, and, if you're lucky, an excellent excuse to buy a new bonnet. You drift home on a wave of moral satisfaction, ready to recover from the perils of benevolence with a restorative nap and a slice of guilt-free cake. You venture out for a walk in Hyde Park, carefully avoiding puddles that are rumoured to contain more diseases than your doctor has names for. The stroll is less about exercise and more about being photographed by society papers. If you manage not to trip over your own spats, you're basically royalty. The fresh air, such as it is, greets you with a fragrant mixture of cut grass, horse manure, and whatever unspeakable secrets the Thames has decided to share with the city this week. You clutch your parasol or walking cane like a life raft, stepping lightly onto the gravel paths, which are policed by both park attendants and legions of ducks with questionable intentions. Everywhere you look, London's finest are parading in carefully orchestrated nonchalance. Ladies drift by in frothy pastel dresses, veils pinned so precariously they flutter with every breath of wind. Gentlemen stride, hands clasped behind their backs, hats perched at angles scientifically proven to inspire envy. This is not exercise, it's performance art. Your pace is dictated by social protocol and the threat of being overtaken by someone more fashionable. No one in Hyde Park is actually here to walk. You are here to see, and more importantly, to be seen. Gossip columnists lurk behind decorative shrubbery, sketching furiously in notebooks, ready to immortalize any scandalous misstep, literally. A single stumble on a loose stone could end up in the morning paper, right between the shipping forecast and news of the Queen's latest hair appointment. Your entourage keeps a respectful distance, just close enough to catch you if you swoon but far enough to make you look independent. The maid scans for photographers. The footman carries a blanket, just in case you feel compelled to take the air in a more horizontal fashion. Occasionally, a distant relative you've successfully avoided for months appears on the horizon, waving with the determined enthusiasm of someone seeking a favor. You consider feigning a twisted ankle, but you're already overdue for polite conversation. The park itself is a living tableau of Victorian ambition. Rowboats drift along the Serpentine, their occupants as elegantly bored as anyone can be without refreshments. Children, released from the tyranny of indoor behavior, chase one another with shrieks of joy that are quickly shushed by nannies wielding stern looks and starched aprons. At every turn there is someone of note: politicians, opera singers, a duke's mysterious second cousin, everyone perfectly positioned for the possibility of accidental greatness. It's not all smooth sailing. Puddles lie in wait like booby traps, disguised by last season's leaves and the optimistic footprints of the underdressed. You sidestep expertly, having learned the hard way that nothing shortens a career in high society like an unplanned face-first encounter with Victorian mud. Behind you, your footman discreetly wipes a fleck of sludge from your shoe before it can become a family legend. As you make your way past the fashionable Italian gardens and the somewhat less fashionable geese, you overhear snatches of conversation, complaints about the weather, unspeakable really, speculation about Lord Buckworth's new moustache, positively aggressive, and updates on the latest society romance. She's American, you know. You smile, nod, and utter the occasional indeed at strategic intervals. Mastery of the neutral agreement is a key skill in Hyde Park diplomacy. The stroll concludes, as always, at the park's most photogenic bench. You pause, arrange your skirts or trousers with the practiced flair of a stage actor, and gaze pensively into the middle distance, just long enough for the nearest journalist to capture your candid repose. With luck, tomorrow's papers will describe you as serene, graceful, or, at the very least, upright. Satisfied, you return to your carriage, one shoe slightly damp, pride intact, and reputation more or less unsullied. You have braved the wilds of Hyde Park, avoided both mud and minor nobility, and provided the world with one more glimpse of elegance in the face of uncooperative weather and overzealous mallards. In Victorian London, that's the closest anyone gets to a true workout. Tea time is a sacred ritual featuring tiny cakes, enormous teapots, and a strict schedule enforced by the National Tea Police. You balance delicate cups, nibble on pastries, and try not to think about how many calories you've consumed since breakfast. Bonus points for not getting crumbs on the lace. By 4 o'clock, the very walls of your home seem to lean forward in anticipation. Afternoon tea is less of a meal and more of a competitive event. A daily exam in etiquette, portion control, and the fine art of not dropping your sandwich into your lap. In Victorian London, a person's worth is measured not by their bank account, but by their ability to pour tea without splashing and to eat a scone without visible jam stains. The scene is set. A table draped in white linen, groaning under the weight of tiered cake stands, gleaming china, and sugar bowls shaped like miniature palaces. Every surface is protected by lace doilies, as if any unsupervised crumb might trigger an insurance claim. The centerpiece is the teapot itself, large enough to double as a bird bath and always swaddled in a hand-embroidered cozy to keep the liquid at the perfect temperature for a solid 6 minutes. Your guests assemble, each one bringing a personal agenda and a dangerously sharp cake fork. Conversation begins in a low murmur, compliments about the weather, the softness of the scones, and the marvel of how Mrs. Biddlesworth manages to stay so trim while inhaling lemon drizzle like a vacuum. The distribution of treats is a diplomatic minefield. Too few sandwiches, and you're considered stingy. Too many, and people suspect you're hiding a guilty conscience or a third dinner. You, as host or favored guest, perform a delicate ballet of pouring tea, passing milk, and remembering that one must never, under any circumstances, add milk to the cup before the tea. This is not merely a question of taste, but of moral character. The milk-first crowd will never truly belong, no matter how many cucumber sandwiches they consume. Then come the cakes. Towers of petites, fours, slabs of Victoria sponge, mountains of Battenberg so garishly coloured they could signal passing ships. There are eclairs filled with cream, meringues so fragile they tremble if you breathe on them, and mysterious jellied things that wobble with the confidence of a debutante at her first ball. Each pastry must be consumed in exactly 2 bites. Any more, and you risk a social faux pas. Any less, and you risk starvation. The real danger, though, is the crumbs. Every plate is ringed by a line of tiny, traitorous particles that cling to sleeves, skirts, and, most damningly, lace. The greatest skill a Victorian can possess, outside of embroidery and discreet matchmaking, is the ability to eat a ginger biscuit while leaving absolutely no trace. Some families have developed elaborate rituals for discreetly brushing crumbs onto the carpet, to be swept up later by a long-suffering maid who is paid extra for her silence. Just when you think you might escape the table without having to unbutton your corset, the butler appears with a fresh wave of teapots and a new selection of pastries. The process begins anew. At some point, someone will propose a toast to the Queen, or perhaps to tea itself, as if to acknowledge that without this daily carbohydrate intake, society would collapse in a heap of low blood sugar and unresolved gossip. Tea time eventually drifts to a close as guests begin to discreetly loosen their waistbands and offer increasingly creative excuses for why they must depart before the final round of fruitcake. The room is left in a haze of bergamot, sugar, and suppressed emotion, with only the faintest echo of polite laughter and the distant sound of someone finally giving in and eating the last macaron. You emerge from the fray victorious, your social standing secured for another day. Your blood now composed of roughly 20% Darjeeling and your lace miraculously still white. All that's left is to prepare yourself for the next great Victorian tradition, dinner, which is, impossibly, an even bigger ordeal than tea. You retreat to your personal bath, an opulent tub the size of a small boat, where servants add scented oils, rose petals, and, occasionally, actual champagne. You emerge smelling less like a human and more like a well-funded flower shop, ready to face another round of social combat. A proper Victorian bath is not simply a matter of personal cleanliness. It is a ritual, a statement, and, if you're truly wealthy, a competitive sport. The process begins with the heating of enough water to irrigate a small farm, carried in buckets by a procession of footmen whose biceps could easily double as table legs. The water is filtered, boiled, and strained, then poured into your porcelain tub by the light of a dozen candles arranged for maximum flattering effect and minimum accident risk. Before you even touch the water, your maid tests the temperature with a silver spoon. Wooden spoons are strictly for the lower classes or the truly reckless. The tub itself is lined with linen sheets so soft you could swear they've been blessed by a minor saint. Your bathing robe, monogrammed and fluffed to within an inch of its life, waits nearby, ready to enfold you in the embrace of luxury, self-satisfaction, and just a hint of class anxiety. Bathing in the Victorian age is as much about aroma as it is about removing actual dirt. You are offered a dizzying array of additives: almond oil, violets, lavender, rosemary, and a blend known only as eau de respectability. Someone throws in a handful of rose petals for effect, followed by a dash of imported French perfume, and, if it's a special day, a generous pour of champagne. It's less wash and go, more poach gently and serve on a platter. As you slide into the steaming water, the world melts away. For a blissful moment, you can pretend that outside, the city is clean, the weather is clear, and nobody is whispering about your second cousin's habit of playing the piano after midnight. The servants stand by discreetly, ready to fetch more hot water or a fresh towel should you so much as sneeze. Your only task is to relax, preferably while not dozing off and sliding under the water, which is frowned upon in polite circles. The soap, naturally, is triple milled, scented, and shaped like something that would win a medal at the World's Fair. Your maid lathers and scrubs with the care of someone restoring an old master painting, occasionally pausing to ask if the lavender is too assertive. Shampoo is poured from delicate glass bottles, the contents promising to bestow shine, volume, and possibly royal connections. For gentlemen, a stiff bristled brush is applied to any lingering stubble. For ladies, the bath is followed by a final rinse of cold water for the complexion, and as a quick reminder that comfort is not always fashionable. Once your skin is deemed adequately cleansed, the process of drying off is itself a production. Towels are warmed by the fire, then draped around you like the world's softest armor. Any lingering dampness is banished with powder, rose-scented, jasmine, or, for the daring, heliotrope. Every inch of you is inspected for stray droplets, rebellious hairs, or the faintest whiff of anything less than prosperity. The finishing touch? Perfume, of course. Applied behind the ears, on the wrists, and in enough discreet places that you leave a scented trail wherever you go, like a well-groomed bloodhound. For men, a final splash of cologne, crisp, bracing, and guaranteed to frighten away both disease and potential rivals. For women, a cloud of floral mist that announces your entrance before you've even rounded the corner. Stepping from the bath, you are no longer merely clean, you are transformed, invigorated, and equipped with a shield of scent and softness capable of facing even the most critical great-aunt. In the world of Victorian high society, personal hygiene is the ultimate power move, and tonight you smell like triumph, or at the very least, like someone who could never, ever be accused of smelling at all. Dinner attire is not for the faint of heart or ribcage. You are laced, pinned, and buttoned into formal wear so elaborate it would make a modern wedding dress weep with envy. The goal: look glamorous enough to be painted, But not so glamorous, you accidentally startle the household staff. The evening dressing ritual begins long before any actual eating is on the horizon. A gong echoes through the hallways, the universal signal for everyone to abandon whatever shenanigans they were up to and report to their respective dressing rooms. Servants scurry like clockwork mice, laying out outfits that are less clothes and more portable monuments to suffering and status. You, of course, are not allowed to dress alone. That would be undignified and, quite frankly, logistically impossible. For women, the lady's maid arrives wielding a small armory of laces, pins, bustles, and a look of grim determination. The first task, the corset. It's pulled tighter with each breath until you're shaped like a decorative vase and can only speak in polite, measured syllables. Breathing is now an optional hobby, best reserved for the truly idle. Layers upon layers follow, crisp petticoats, embroidered chemises, underskirts so voluminous they require their own zip code, and, finally, the evening gown itself. Yards of silk, velvet, or taffeta engineered to glide across parquet floors and quietly bankrupt the family fortune. Each sleeve is a separate engineering project. The bodice is designed to encourage excellent posture and existential reflection. By the time you're finished, you're no longer sure where your body ends and your outfit begins. For gentlemen, things are only slightly less torturous. The valet appears with a stack of freshly pressed shirts so stiff they could be used for fencing practice. There's the starched collar removable, because why not make life more complicated? A cravat that requires both a manual and nerves of steel, and a waistcoat so tightly tailored you're pretty sure it's supposed to keep your secrets as well as your torso. The dinner jacket is black, formal, and carries the faint scent of mothballs and crushed ambition. As for accessories, it's a veritable smorgasbord of social anxiety, cufflinks that have a family history, shoes polished to a blinding sheen, gloves so white you're afraid to breathe near them, and jewelry carefully chosen to imply you're both modest and slightly superior. A single misplaced brooch or mismatched button could launch 1,000 rumors and, if you're very unlucky, inspire a caricature in the society pages. Hair is brushed and arranged with military precision. Ladies might opt for a tiara, because why not crown yourself after surviving the day? Gentlemen, meanwhile, are subjected to pomade, moustache wax, and the endless scrutiny of a valet who will absolutely remember if your part is off by a single degree. Mirrors are everywhere, so you can check yourself from all angles, and perhaps question every life choice that led to this moment. Your reflection is at once glamorous, mysterious, and ever so slightly terrified. You attempt a trial, curtsy, or bow. The outfit creaks ominously, but holds victory. When you finally emerge, you join a slow-moving procession of family members, each one a little more breathless and over-decorated than the last. There is an unspoken competition. Who will look the most radiant? Who will suffer most quietly? And who will manage to descend the main staircase without tripping, fainting, or triggering a spontaneous wardrobe malfunction? By the time you reach the dining room, you are both a work of art and a cautionary tale. The servants await, faces carefully blank, having witnessed decades of sartorial emergencies and the occasional noble collapse. You try to look effortless, as though you wear whalebone and velvet for fun, and absolutely did not just spend 20 minutes negotiating with your own sleeve, because in Victorian London, dinner isn't just a meal, it's a spectacle, and the first act is always the costumes. Dinner is a multi-hour, multi-course marathon of chewing, sipping, and guessing which fork is for which organ meat. Your host delivers long, confusing toasts, and you do your best not to spill gravy on the priceless family tapestry. Dessert is served at midnight, just in time for indigestion. The dinner gong sounds, vibrating through the manor like a gentle warning. Guests assemble in the drawing room, whispering pleasantries and performing subtle visual checks. Is my glove on the correct hand? Did I remember to remove the price tag from my tiara? The butler solemnly announces that dinner is served, and you parade into the dining room in a procession so stately it could be mistaken for a minor royal wedding. The table is a glistening field of glass, silver, and porcelain. Place settings are so elaborate that you'd be forgiven for thinking you've wandered onto the set of an etiquette training video. Rows of gleaming forks, spoons, knives, each with its own arcane purpose, stretch before you like a cryptic map. Heaven help you if you start with the wrong fork. One misstep and Aunt Eugenia will arch an eyebrow so pointed you'll feel it for a week. The meal begins with oysters, because nothing says welcome quite like a shell full of seawater and existential risk. The soup follows, ladled into bowls so fragile you suspect they'd shatter if you ever actually tried to cut your food with enthusiasm. After the soup, an endless parade of courses, fish, then poultry, then game, then beef, then something unidentifiable but surely expensive. Each dish is accompanied by its own wine, selected to perfectly pair with the food and to gently erode your ability to remember which fork you were supposed to be using. Conversation flows as steadily as the wine. Your host, resplendent at the head of the table, stands to deliver a toast so convoluted that it requires footnotes and a map. Glasses are raised, compliments paid to the chef, and, inevitably, some cousin tells a joke so ancient it predates the wallpaper. If you're lucky, the only thing to break the silence is the sound of someone discreetly choking on a caper. Throughout, the servants move with balletic precision, clearing plates, refilling glasses, and occasionally rescuing wayward cutlery from under the table. The butler, with the focus of a chess grandmaster, oversees the proceedings. It is his sacred duty to ensure the wine flows, the roast is not dry, and the cat does not leap onto the table for the third time this month. You make polite conversation with your neighbours, discussing the weather, always damp, politics, never too loudly, and the current opera season. The less said about Signora Belladonna's high notes, the better. A spirited debate erupts over whether the green beans were overcooked or just misunderstood. Across the table, someone is still puzzling over the fish knife, holding it as if it might bite. By the 8th course, time loses all meaning. You feel your corset or waistcoat tightening, your interest in organ meat waning, and your resolve fading with every forkful of something a la mode. Still, the dessert trolley arrives with a flourish. Syllabubs, trifles, and a flaming pudding paraded through the room like a victorious gladiator. Dessert is finally served around midnight, just as the candles begin to flicker and you start planning your escape. As coffee and chocolates are passed around, the final toasts are given, this time shorter, but with an urgency that suggests everyone is ready for bed, or at least a less vertical position. The evening concludes with a round of applause for the host, the kitchen, and anyone who managed to survive the meal without scandal or gravy stains. You rise, legs slightly wobbly, brain foggy from food, drink, and conversation. You made it through the grand dinner, a marathon of etiquette, endurance, and abdominal fortitude. As you retreat, you marvel at the sheer absurdity of needing 12 forks to get through one meal, and you vow to invent a simpler system right after you finish digesting. Once the plates are cleared, it's time for entertainment. Recitations of slightly alarming poetry, competitive ghost storytelling, and a round of parlor games so complicated you suspect they're made up on the spot. Someone plays the piano. Badly. You clap politely, quietly plotting your escape. The moment dessert is swept away and coffee cups have clinked their last, the evening transforms. The dining room doors swing open and you drift, or possibly waddle, into the drawing room, where chairs have been reconfigured in a circle that promises equal parts intimacy and potential humiliation. Lamps are dimmed for atmosphere, which means you can just barely see who's yawning and who's mentally tallying how much it will cost to replace the parlor rug if the punch gets spilled again. The first order of business is poetry. Naturally, it's not the light, uplifting sort. It's the kind that starts with "oh, woe," and ends with the entire room pondering the inevitability of fog and disappointment. A distant cousin recites in a trembling voice, eyes fixed firmly on a mouldy potted fern. You nod along, feigning deep intellectual engagement while wondering if there's enough brandy left to make the next hour blur together nicely. Once the gloom of poetry has adequately lowered everyone's expectations, it's time for ghost stories. Here, the competition heats up. The drawing room grows hushed as each guest tries to outdo the last. Phantom brides, haunted libraries, a headless earl who's really just misunderstood. The host delivers the classic tale of the whistling butler, guaranteed to make the footman in the hall shift uncomfortably and refuse to enter any room without knocking for a week. Your own contribution involves a haunted candlestick, a mysterious draught, and a marmalade jar that keeps moving when no one's looking. Judging by the nervous laughter, you may have invented a new genre, supernatural kitchen horror. Parlor games come next, a tradition so ingrained that no one can remember how it started, or, crucially, how to make it stop. Tonight's offerings include charades, but only scenes from the collected works of Sir Walter Scott, Blind Man's Bluff, which is mostly a test of furniture placement, and something called Consequences that ends in a flurry of giggles and wild accusations about who wrote Lord Dithers elopes with a wheel of Stilton. At some point, the rules dissolve into chaos, and the game becomes less about winning and more about avoiding being volunteered to act out a scene involving livestock and minor royalty. As the evening lurches forward, the host gently but firmly suggests a musical interlude. This is the signal for every guest who once took 2 piano lessons to nervously approach the instrument and declare, "Oh, I simply couldn't." You know how this ends. Within 5 minutes, someone is mangling greensleeves, 2 others are arguing over tempo, and the family dog is hiding under the sofa, paws over its ears. Applause is mandatory, regardless of actual enjoyment. You clap with the practiced sincerity of someone who's endured 3 decades of after-dinner performances and still doesn't know if it's more polite to compliment the pianist's passion or their bravery. If you're truly unlucky, the host will propose a group sing-along, at which point several guests suddenly remember urgent letters to write, imaginary headaches, or pressing engagements elsewhere, possibly in another country. Through it all, you maintain the correct expression, a faint smile, wide eyes, and the poise of someone who knows that survival in Victorian society is mostly about endurance and a well-timed cough. If you're particularly skillful, you'll engineer your escape just as the limericks start, quietly vanishing like a social magician into the safety of a dim corridor. And so, the evening winds down. You've survived the poetry, braved the ghosts, muddled through the parlor games, and weathered the piano. You've earned your bed, your brandy, and, most importantly, a little peace and quiet. Because in Victorian London, entertainment is always served after dinner, whether you're ready or not. Downstairs, the servants live in a parallel universe where your every quirk is discussed, your wardrobe is quietly mocked, and your terrible attempts at French are recited for laughs. The real drama isn't upstairs. It's in the kitchen, where the cook rules with a wooden spoon and 0 patience. If you think life above stairs is a complex ballet of etiquette and subtle sabotage, you should see the performance below. The household staff operate with military precision. Every task, a coordinated maneuver, every hallway, a thoroughfare of whispered alliances and careful timing. While you fret about dinner seating and whether your cravat is too forward for a Tuesday, the real game is happening out of sight, just past the swing doors, in a world fueled by strong tea and stronger opinions. The day starts at dawn, as housemaids scurry through the shadowed halls, collecting laundry with a speed and efficiency that would make your morning look like a gentle yawn. They have a 6th sense for muddy boots, unemptied chamber pots, and the exact moment to vanish when a family row erupts upstairs. By the time you're selecting your breakfast, They've already survived 2 minor catastrophes and one major dispute about whether the parlor rug counts as clean enough for company. In the kitchen, the air is thick with the scent of bread, simmering stew, and the simmering resentment of the scullery maid, who's been scrubbing the same pan since sunup. The cook reigns supreme, armed with a wooden spoon, a formidable glare, and a vocabulary that would scandalize even the toughest cabman. Every dish is a performance. There are no recipes, just tradition, instinct, and a fierce determination to never let the family know how close the soup came to disaster. The butler is the commander of all that happens below stairs. With his ledger, his watchful eye, and his ability to make a footman freeze at 30 paces, he maintains order and ensures that no one from the drawing room ever glimpses the organized chaos of real life. His greatest skill, however, is in the art of information gathering. There is nothing he doesn't know. Who broke the best teapot? Who is sweet on the new housemaid? Or which of last night's leftovers went missing and into whose apron pocket? Gossip is the true currency below stairs. A single offhand remark by the master of the house can become a full-blown legend by nightfall. Did you see the mistress's new hat? Do you think the youngest daughter's suitor is really from Yorkshire? And what was the master mumbling in French this morning? By evening, your butchered accent is being performed with gusto by the kitchen staff, complete with dramatic gesturing and a chorus of laughter. While you change outfits for the 3rd time today, the maids wager on whether you'll notice the missing button. While you ponder the seating chart, the footman is tallying the odds of Uncle Rupert falling asleep in the soup again. Every meal, every letter, every fainting spell is dissected, analyzed, and, when possible, improved with a generous dash of invention. Yet below stairs, there is loyalty too. When an emergency strikes, a missing brooch, an unexpected guest, or a disaster in the larder, the servants close ranks, fixing disasters before you ever know they happened. There is a code. What happens in the servants' hall stays there, except for the best stories, which are told and retold until they become legend. Late at night, after the fires are banked and the house finally quiet, the staff gathers in the kitchen, feet up, tea in hand, swapping stories and victories of the day. The cook grumbles about the master's taste in pudding, the footman boasts about his perfect posture, and the maid finally confesses to hiding the missing sock in the umbrella stand, just to see if anyone would notice. Because while the world upstairs glitters, it's the world below that keeps everything running and keeps the best secrets. And as the last candle is snuffed out, the house settles into a peace only the servants truly understand, already preparing for tomorrow's round of gentle chaos and quiet triumph. Sooner or later, you'll stumble into a scandal. Maybe you used the wrong spoon, wore last season's bonnet, or were caught reading a novel in public. The only way to survive is to issue a carefully worded statement, retreat to your country house, and hope the Queen finds someone else to gossip about. Victorian London is a city powered by rumours and propelled by reputation. You might think you're immune. What with your solid family name, impeccable gloves, and that one time you almost met Prince Albert in a garden centre, but no one is safe from the hungry jaws of society's scandal machine. All it takes is one misstep, one moment of weakness, and suddenly you're the main course at the weekly gossip banquet. Perhaps it starts innocently. You forget to greet Lady Chatterley at the opera, or you accidentally wear a colour considered unlucky on a Thursday. Within hours, a web of whispers is spun around your social life, each thread knotted with speculation and embroidered with a healthy dose of exaggeration. The footmen know before you do. The butler's eyebrow rises a quarter inch. Your maid offers you your morning tea with a look of discreet sympathy. It's official. You are a person of interest. The first rule of surviving scandal is not to panic, at least not in public. Panic is reserved for the privacy of your boudoir, where you can pace in circles, wring your lace handkerchief, and compose increasingly elaborate letters to your most trusted friend. who will of course never breathe a word. Translation: she will absolutely breathe several words, probably before you finish your signature. Instead, you must master the art of the apology without admission. It's a subtle performance. You express regret at any distress caused. You misunderstand the rules of cutlery, and you assure everyone that your reading of that shocking French novel was purely for educational purposes. Your words are vague enough to fit any occasion, but polite enough to leave your dignity intact. The more flowery the phrasing, the less likely anyone is to notice you haven't actually apologized for anything. With your statement issued, it's time for the strategic withdrawal. A sudden attack of nerves, fatigue, or the highly contagious seasonal malaise gives you the perfect excuse to retreat to the countryside. You pack your bags, instruct the staff to forward only the most urgent correspondence, and take up temporary residence in a house so remote the postman has to leave breadcrumbs. There, surrounded by fresh air and disinterested sheep, you wait for London's attention to wander. Meanwhile, the city moves on. A baronet elopes with a governess. A duchess loses her tiara in the soup course. The Queen's corgi bites a bishop. Each fresh disaster pushes you further down the social news feed, until you're only a faint aftertaste in the collective memory. Your friends send cautiously encouraging notes. It will all blow over soon. And your enemies send flowers, just in case you're never seen again. During your exile, you reflect on the fragility of social standing. One week, you're the toast of the town. The next, you're an object lesson in why one must always double-check the invitation for theme attire. In the countryside, you develop new hobbies: sketching, bird-watching, or taking long walks in which you practice your most innocent expressions. If pressed, you maintain that you've learned valuable lessons: humility, discretion, and how to spot a rumor before it knocks over your garden statue. When you finally return, it's with a fresh wardrobe, a careful smile, and a new appreciation for small talk about the weather. By then, society is ready to forgive and forget, at least until the next scandal. For in Victorian London, as in life, nothing is ever quite as shocking as it first appears. And nothing, absolutely nothing, is more reassuring than knowing that next time it'll be someone else's turn to blush, bow, and book the earliest train out of town. Feeling unwell? Summon the family physician, who may prescribe a brisk walk, a glass of port, or, if feeling especially modern, a round of leeches. If you're lucky, you'll survive your cold. If not, at least you'll be buried in silk. In Victorian London, a sniffle is never just a sniffle. Any minor malaise could be the prelude to a weeks-long convalescence featuring enough drama to fill 3 serialized novels. The first step in this medical odyssey is alerting the household. Bells are rung, runners dispatched, and servants sent scurrying to summon Dr. Pruse, Fanshawe, or whichever member of the local medical gentry is available, and not embroiled in a scandal involving patent medicines. The doctor arrives in style, usually with a bag full of brass instruments and a mustache, so authoritative it deserves its own consulting fee. He greets the household with gravitas and is ushered into your sick room, where you recline heroically among pillows and decorative shawls, looking as pale and interesting as possible. The doctor's diagnosis is more art than science. He asks a few searching questions. Are you feeling weak in the humours? Has your spleen been especially spirited this week? Then examines you by taking your pulse, peering at your tongue, and tapping various organs to see if they sound optimistic. Prescriptions in this era are as varied as the ailments. Most start with bed rest, which, for the wealthy, is less about health and more about making a dramatic statement. You are encouraged to take to your 4-poster bed, surrounded by piles of novels, decorative cushions, and enough cut flowers to start a medium-sized florist. If you're feeling adventurous, you might be prescribed a walk in the garden, but only if the weather is clement and the risk of scandal from an unchaperoned stroll is acceptably low. Of course, no Victorian cure is complete without the liberal application of alcohol. Champagne is considered both a tonic and a mood enhancer, especially when administered at breakfast. Port is standard for female weaknesses, sherry for nerves, and brandy for almost everything else, including the shock of receiving the bill. If you're not feeling better by the second glass, you're advised to persevere until either your symptoms subside or you forget what they were. For ailments that resist the healing powers of leisure and liquor, the physician may reach for his more advanced tools. Leeches, kept in a special jar and introduced with all the ceremony of a visiting dignitary. The leeches are applied with a flourish to draw out bad blood, evil spirits, or, at the very least, your enthusiasm for further medical treatment. If that fails, there's always the fallback. Bleeding, a gentle euphemism for draining you of several pints of blood, just in case you had too much to begin with. Other treatments are equally bewildering. Mustard plasters, herbal teas, cod liver oil, vigorous rubbing with goose grease. Every symptom has a remedy, and every remedy is guaranteed to make you long for the days when ignorance was bliss. The apothecary sends over powders, potions, and elixirs, promising to cure everything from headaches to heartbreak, all conveniently flavored with something vaguely metallic. Your family gathers by your bedside, offering comfort, prayers, and, if things look dire, hastily written amendments to your will. There are hushed conversations in the hallway, debates over whether to summon a specialist from Harley Street, and at least one suggestion that you try the new electric machine recently demonstrated at a scientific soiree. If you survive, you're considered both fortunate and fashionable. Convalescence becomes a social event, with visitors eager to bring flowers and obtain the latest updates on your heroic battle with mild congestion. But if your illness proves overwhelming, there is a certain comfort in knowing that your exit will be as luxurious as your life. A silk-lined coffin, a parade of mourners, and a eulogy composed entirely of euphemisms. Either way, in Victorian London, medicine is never dull, and, with luck, neither are you. After dinner, the city comes alive with opera, theatre, and masked balls. You slip out in a carriage, mingling with aristocrats and artists, occasionally mistaking one for the other. The evening ends with you standing in a foggy street, wondering where your top hat went. Night in Victorian London is when the real stories happen, the ones you don't mention in polite company until at least 3 generations have safely passed. The air vibrates with promise, or maybe just the residual hum of thousands of gaslights flickering to life. Streets that by day reek of ambition and horse manure are transformed, briefly, into boulevards of possibility. For those with money, an iron constitution, and a taste for mild recklessness, the night is a call to adventure. Your first stop might be the opera. The Royal Opera House, glowing in the darkness, is a magnet for every social climber, aesthetic enthusiast, and person hoping to glimpse someone famous while pretending not to look. You glide into your private box with the confidence of a seasoned theatre-goer, armed with opera glasses, a fan, and a mental list of excuses for when you inevitably fall asleep during Act 2. The music soars, the prima donna hits her high note, and you attempt to look thoughtful while surreptitiously scanning the other boxes for gossip and wardrobe malfunctions. If the opera is too staid, the theatre calls, where the entertainment is as much in the audience as on the stage. The plays are full of wit, innuendo, and the kind of melodrama that makes your own family gatherings look positively restrained. In the stalls, you trade whispers about the playwright's debts, the leading actor's scandalous affair with a milliner, and whether the baronet in row 3 is wearing rouge. The theatre is a safe space for anyone wanting to laugh, cry, or just gossip with fewer witnesses. But for the bold, the truly glittering invitation is to a masquerade ball. Here, fashion and fantasy merge, and anonymity is the evening's theme. You arrive swathed in velvet, silk, and just enough mystery to make people wonder if you're an earl or an extremely confident florist. Masks shimmer, feathers quiver, and the dance floor becomes a swirling sea of secrets and accidental toe injuries. Here you can waltz with your nemesis, exchange banter with a duchess, and slip a cryptic note to the only person brave enough to wear a pineapple on their head. Throughout the night, the city offers temptations in every alley. There are gambling dens disguised as gentlemen's reading rooms, art salons where you can accidentally purchase a painting of a cabbage for the price of a pony, and supper clubs where the punch is so strong that even the spoons have regrets. If you're particularly unlucky, you may find yourself locked in a heated debate about the merits of modern poetry at 1 a.m. with a man named Percy, who insists he's the spiritual heir of Lord Byron. And of course, there are always after-parties. Someone's cousin knows a duke, who knows an actress, who knows a chef with a fondness for absinthe. Before you know it, you're eating oysters in a candlelit kitchen, reciting limericks, and realizing you've lost both your sense of time and at least one glove. At last, you emerge onto the street, the city shrouded in its perpetual London fog. Your feet ache, your head spins, and you're pretty sure you've just promised to sponsor a regatta. Your top hat is missing, your hair smells faintly of champagne and mystery, and a newsboy is already yelling headlines about something you vaguely remember doing. But that's nightlife in Victorian London, a blur of music, masks, laughter, and questionable decisions. The stories will be retold and embroidered. And by morning, you'll have convinced yourself you really did leave before midnight, even if your hat says otherwise. For all the parties and extravagance, being rich in Victorian London can feel strangely lonely. You stare into your ornate mirror, wondering if anyone actually likes you, or if they just want an invite to your next garden party. It's tough at the top, especially when the air is this bad. There's a special kind of quiet that settles over a grand house after midnight. The laughter from the ballroom lingers in the rafters, but now the only sounds are the distant ticking of a French clock and the exhausted sighs of someone folding napkins in the butler's pantry. You stand in your candlelit dressing room, surrounded by silk and silver, and realize that all the luxury in the world can't quite hush the tiny, persistent voice that asks, "Is this it?" You pace the room, absently straightening a vase of lilies, an arrangement that was praised by 3 duchesses and a viscount, none of whom actually looked at the flowers. The room is filled with gifts, mementos, party favors from events so glamorous you can't even remember who hosted them. Your calendar is packed with invitations, your closet with ball gowns and tailcoats. There are people everywhere, but connection is rare as fresh air on a foggy London evening. The truth is, every grand entrance comes with the faint suspicion that the applause is for your wealth, not your wit. Every heartfelt compliment seems, somehow, rehearsed. Friends are plentiful in the sunlight of social success, but in the dark, even your shadow sometimes looks like it's trying to escape. You begin to suspect that half the city would show up for your funeral, not to grieve, but to see who gets the best seats and whether the refreshments are up to standard. Sometimes, you long for the simplicity of anonymity. A walk through Hyde Park where no one bows. A breakfast where you can eat jam straight from the jar without risking a scandal. A conversation with someone who calls you by your first name and means it as something other than a networking opportunity. You dream of slipping away to the countryside, trading your chandelier for a cottage window, your imported carpets for a patch of honest mud. But the machinery of status is relentless. There are always more parties, more expectations, more strangers to impress and acquaintances to remember. You attend charity galas and garden fetes, you host elaborate dinners, and yet sometimes, in the middle of the laughter and the music, you feel like a well-dressed ghost haunting your own life. The city's endless clamor becomes a kind of muffled silence, each congratulatory toast echoing a little too loudly inside your head. At moments like these, you find yourself confiding in the family dog, who, to his credit, seems genuinely interested in your worries, especially if you speak while holding a biscuit. Or perhaps you seek solace in a late-night letter to an old friend, one who knew you before the titles and the etiquette manuals, back when your biggest concern was hiding muddy boots, not muddy reputations. Still, there are silver linings, even in the smog. the housemaid's shy smile when you thank her by name, the odd delight of hearing a favorite song drift up from the servants' hall, the satisfaction of a genuine, unforced laugh, shared with someone who isn't angling for an introduction to the Prince of Wales. Small, quiet moments, hard-won, fleeting, and oddly precious. So you turn away from the mirror, blow out the candle, and slip into bed. The house creaks around you, settling into the hush of wealth's peculiar solitude. You pull the covers close, feeling the weight of blankets and expectations alike, and remind yourself that sometimes, even in a gilded cage, there's a patch of moonlight that feels like hope. Finally, you retreat to your bedroom, where a servant has already warmed the sheets and hidden the family ghost in the closet. You change into nightclothes that cost more than a servant's yearly wage, and listen to the city's distant carriages as you drift off, one eyelid at a time. The bedchamber of a wealthy Victorian is less a place to sleep and more a destination, an entire experience designed to soothe, impress, and occasionally terrify. Everything is padded, embroidered, or monogrammed. Your enormous canopy bed towers like a monument to the very concept of comfort. Its posts draped with enough fabric to curtain the main stage at Covent Garden. A fire crackles in the marble hearth, chased into roaring submission by a servant with strong arms and a deeply personal relationship with kindling. Before you're allowed near the covers, your nightly ritual begins. The valet or lady's maid appears with a silver-backed hairbrush, silk robe, and a jug of something herbal. For the nerves, they claim, though you suspect it's also used to polish the banisters. You are gently debuttoned and decorseted. Pins and jewelry laid out on a velvet tray as if your day's efforts have just been appraised for auction. There is a moment of silence for any unfortunate stockings that did not survive the ball. Next, the washing up. A bowl of warm water, delicately scented with lavender or rose, is offered for your hands and face. Your nightcap, either the frilly cotton kind or the fortifying brandy kind, is presented with a conspiratorial wink. You breathe in the steam from your cup, thinking, this is the closest I'll ever get to feeling truly safe from drafts, rumours, and gout. The bed itself has been prepped to a military standard. Warmed bricks, wrapped in flannel, of course, have been placed beneath the covers at exactly the right spot to avoid freezing your toes, but not so close as to create a Victorian sauna. Pillows are fluffed, sheets are tucked, and any lurking supernatural entities have been reassured or at least politely bribed to keep the moaning to a minimum until sunrise. You slip between the sheets, Egyptian cotton, naturally, feeling the day's weight melt into the mattress, which is stuffed with enough goose down to make you question the population statistics of rural England. Around you, the room settles. Outside, the last of the carriages rumbles by, wheels crunching over cobblestones in the musical way that only distant inconvenience can sound. There's a final inventory of luxuries, a porcelain jug of water on the bedside table, the latest serialized novel, set aside after 2 paragraphs because your eyelids are losing the will to participate, and a bell pull within easy reach, should you need hot milk, a misplaced candlestick, or immediate reassurance that the family ghost is, in fact, just Cousin Percival looking for the bathroom. Some nights, you might let your mind drift, counting the number of ceiling roses, or speculating on the true purpose of the ornate footstool at the end of the bed. No one knows. It's just always been there, like inherited guilt. The house creaks and sighs, settling into its nocturnal patterns, whined against the glass, the hush of carpets absorbing footsteps, the distant pop of a log in the grate. As sleep draws near, you tuck your arms beneath the blankets, grateful for warmth, peace, and the quiet satisfaction of having survived another day in the grand circus of upper-class Victorian life. Somewhere in the dark, a clock chimes the hour. The ghost, satisfied with the arrangements, withdraws for the night. You drift off, secure in your luxurious cocoon, as the world beyond your window softens to a gentle, distant hush. If anyone asks in the morning, you'll say you barely noticed the city at all. In truth, you noticed everything, just not enough to keep you from the sweetest sleep money can buy. As you try to sleep, your mind races. Did you remember to tip the butler? Is there enough coal for the fireplace? Is your cousin secretly plotting to steal your fortune, or worse, your spot at the Queen's next luncheon? You sigh, clutch your monogrammed pillow, and vow to survive another absurdly luxurious day. It's a strange thing, lying awake in a palace of comforts. The sheets are crisp and fragrant, the blankets heavy with the faint scent of lavender and just a whisper of smugness. Outside, the city has finally gone quiet. The carriages have faded into the night, and the gaslights burn low, leaving your bedchamber wrapped in the gentle hush that only true wealth can buy. But sleep, that democratic trickster, refuses to arrive on command. No matter how many servants you send for warm milk, or how many expensive wool blankets you layer on top, instead your mind fills with a parade of anxieties uniquely tailored to the rich. Did you thank the cook for the particularly crisp roast potatoes, or will she plot a subtle, slow-burn revenge involving under-seasoned soup? Did you RSVP to Lady Winthrop's charity fete, or have you accidentally consigned yourself to social Siberia, where the only event invitations are to Cousin Edgar's annual root vegetable tasting? There are logistics to consider. Is the wine cellar adequately stocked? Or will next month's dinner parties devolve into scandalous lemonade-fueled chaos? Have the silver spoons been counted lately? Or is the footman eyeing them for a private retirement fund? You ponder the very real possibility that somewhere, right now, a minor aristocrat is plotting to outshine you with an even bigger topiary peacock at their next garden party. Your mind skips from worry to worry with the agility of a squirrel on imported mahogany. What if the housekeeper discovers that embarrassing stash of sentimental letters in the desk drawer? Is your prized rose garden faring well against the city's persistent smog? Or will your breakfast table be graced with withered petals and the silent judgment of Aunt Petunia? Sometimes, the night is filled with more existential questions. Is anyone genuinely fond of you, or are they just circling for invitations and leftover canapés? What if that charming American visitor was right? What if you really could be happier living somewhere with more sun and fewer dinner forks? You stare into the shadows, trying to recall if you ever truly enjoyed a masquerade ball, or if it was simply the novelty of wearing a mask and blaming the punch for every regrettable decision. Your mind briefly revisits childhood fears: ghosts in the wardrobe, bats in the belfry, unannounced visits from well-meaning aunts. The difference now is that if a ghost does appear, you can always hire a medium or at least a very determined housemaid. You smile, realizing that not even the supernatural can resist the combined force of your mother's disapproval and a well-placed broom. Of course, there are also the occasional moments of gratitude, sandwiched between the more pressing concerns. You are warm, safe, and surrounded by the trappings of a life most people only read about in serialized novels. The city may be full of fog and ambition, but your windows are firmly closed, your fortune is secure, for now, and tomorrow is another opportunity to be just a little bit more magnificent, or at least a little better at pretending. At last, you close your eyes and release your grip on the pillow. The worries will wait. Morning will bring new challenges: the art of not fainting in public, the mystery of the missing glove, and the ever-present risk of being mentioned, positively or otherwise, in tomorrow's society column. But for now, you surrender to sleep, confident that whatever the absurdity of today, you've survived it. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again, with a fresh cravat, a carefully rehearsed smile, and the unshakable knowledge that, in Victorian London, sweet dreams are always just a little bit ridiculous. Every so often, family members you barely tolerate descend upon your home like locusts in silk waistcoats. The solution? Flee to your country estate for health reasons. Conveniently, Victorian ailments are as numerous as your second cousins, and no one questions a sudden bout of the vapors if it means skipping another Sunday roast with Uncle Reginald and his travelling monocle collection. It's a fact universally acknowledged in upper-class Victorian life. Relatives will appear just when you are least prepared for them, often bearing news of a recent engagement, a scandalous wager, or, worst of all, a desire to catch up. Some of them you remember fondly from nursery days. Others you suspect have only recently emerged from the family crypt, fueled entirely by fruitcake and unresolved grudges. The only thing more terrifying than your Aunt Lavinia's brandy breath is the moment you realize she's brought her 4 opinionated daughters, all with marriage in mind and eyes set firmly on your unsuspecting guests. At the first hint of a family invasion, the entire household springs into covert action. Valets and ladies' maids exchange knowing glances. The cook suddenly remembers a pressing engagement in Bath. Even the usually unflappable butler adopts an expression best described as emergency protocol. There are whispered consultations in the back hallways about how best to limit damage, redistribute seating, and, if necessary, lock the good china away from the little cousins. This is when you deploy your most trusted weapon: strategic illness, a mysterious chill, a delicate cough, or the infamous nervous exhaustion becomes your golden ticket to escape. With a well-timed sigh and a hand pressed elegantly to your brow, you announce the tragic necessity of retreating to your country estate. No one can argue with poor health, especially not in an era when the medical profession considered fresh air both a panacea and a plausible excuse for hiding from one's family for several weeks at a stretch. The country estate is less a home and more a well-defended fortress of solitude. Here, you can wander among gardens without having to make small talk about anyone's bunion surgery, sip tea in the library, and, for a blissful afternoon, pretend the only family you have are the deer grazing in the distant meadow. The staff at the estate are masters of discretion, knowing that what you really need is peace, quiet, and possibly the occasional forged telegram reporting urgent business in London whenever anyone threatens to visit. Days are filled with long walks, healthy doses of fresh air, and absolutely no relatives. You pen letters home describing your heroic battle with ague or melancholia, sprinkling your prose with just enough dramatic detail to keep even the most meddlesome aunt at bay. Regretfully confined to bed, you write, as you recline in a sun-drenched conservatory, a plate of seed cakes at your elbow, and not a single relative in sight. If your absence is questioned, your doctor, whose signature can be purchased for the price of a decent pheasant, happily attests to your fragile constitution. The country estate becomes your sanctuary, a place to recover from both real and imagined ailments, far from the dangers of family intrigue, surprise piano recitals, and the sort of dinner-table conversation that should come with a warning label. And when the season of familial invasion has passed, you return to the city rejuvenated, re-established as a figure of gentle mystery and delicate health. Your relatives, having moved on to another unsuspecting branch of the family tree, will remember you with a mixture of concern, envy, and a faint suspicion that you're much cleverer than you let on. For in Victorian society, avoiding relatives is not just a skill, it's an art form. And nothing soothes the soul quite like a strategic illness, a locked carriage, and a country estate where the only drama is whether the gardener's dog will once again dig up the petunias. Owning a dog is simply too ordinary for the upper crust. Instead, your neighbours show off with pet monkeys, parrots, or that one gentleman down the road who claims to have a semi-domesticated crocodile. The parlour becomes a menagerie, and you must pretend not to notice when someone's ferret escapes into the soup tureen. Owning an animal that could technically eat you? Just another sign you've made it. The Victorian era is nothing if not a celebration of excess, and nowhere is this more apparent than in the choice of household pets. While the middle classes content themselves with a spaniel or the occasional goldfish, the truly wealthy see pet ownership as an extreme sport. The morning's first challenge? navigating a drawing room that is equal parts zoo, social club, and cautionary tale. You sip your tea, eyes discreetly following Lady Whittingham's parrot as it circles the chandelier for the fourth time this week. The bird has picked up several phrases, most of them inappropriate for tea, and occasionally offers unsolicited commentary on the colour of guests' bonnets. You pretend not to hear it, mutter hideous as your aunt enters the room in what she clearly thought was a daring shade of puce. Just as you begin to relax, a shriek erupts from the sofa. The pet monkey, dressed in a miniature waistcoat, has snatched a scone and is now menacing the guests with a butter knife. The footman, having trained for just such an emergency, intervenes with practiced calm, offering the monkey a slice of lemon cake and a bribe not to climb the curtains. Everyone agrees the little scamp has a spirited temperament, which is Victorian code for one day this animal will be in the papers, and not in a good way. Of course, there's the infamous crocodile, belonging to Major Treadwell, a man with more moustache than sense, and a penchant for bragging about his time in the colonies. The beast resides in a marble basin in the conservatory, sometimes sunning itself next to the lilies, sometimes disappearing for days, only to turn up in the coal cellar. Rumour has it that Treadwell was once chased up a staircase by his own pet, but he maintains it's simply affectionate in its own way. The staff are unconvinced, and the maid now carries a broom everywhere, just in case. For the children, ferrets are all the rage, a choice that results in regular ferret hunts through the household, with shrieks and laughter as the little creatures slip through the legs of scandalized dowagers and vanish behind the settee. Occasionally, a guest discovers a weasel in their overshoe or an unfamiliar tail in the soup. These mishaps are dismissed with a wave of the hand. So terribly sorry. You know how it is when one is fond of natural history. Some families lean into the avian craze, keeping peacocks in the garden and canaries in the drawing room, all competing for the title of loudest noise produced at breakfast. If you're unlucky, you're invited to a luncheon where the conversation is continually interrupted by a cockatoo with unresolved anger issues and a vocabulary that would make a sailor blush. The pets serve more than just as conversation pieces. They are status symbols, living proof that your wealth can conquer not only society, but the laws of nature and good taste. When guests leave, they do so with stories they'll never forget. The time a lemur made off with a hairpin, or the mysterious case of the missing wig, later found adorning a bored tortoise. As you settle in for the evening, you find yourself grateful for your own modest, if slightly judgmental, cat, who at least has never attacked the postman. You remind yourself that in the rarefied air of Victorian high society, the line between pet, pest, and proof of social standing is as thin as your patience for another anecdote about the crocodile's table manners. And so, you nod politely as someone's mongoose inspects your shoes, reminding yourself you've truly arrived when your household requires an animal wrangler, a disaster fund, and an ironclad sense of humour. Nothing says Victorian high society like a healthy belief in ghosts, curses, and the occasional haunted wardrobe. Every mansion comes with at least one family spectre and a guest bedroom where no one ever sleeps twice. Spiritualism is all the rage. Seances are more fashionable than dinner parties. You hope the ghost is friendly, or at least quieter than your neighbour's amateur violin practice. It's an unspoken rule in upper-crust London. If your home lacks a resident ghost, you are either new money or simply not trying hard enough. The morning after your first night in a country house, the real question at breakfast is not, did you sleep well, but did you hear the footsteps outside your door, or was that just the weeping portrait again? Some ghosts prefer dramatic entrances, clanking chains, chilly drafts, mysterious moaning, while others are more passive-aggressive, content to move candlesticks and hide your left shoe on alternate Thursdays. Most families have developed a polite tolerance for these supernatural house guests. The governess will casually reference the old colonel who watches over the nursery. The butler always leaves the third stair unpolished, just in case, and guests are briefed on which rooms to avoid if they value a good night's sleep or an unbroken mirror. Over time, hauntings become just another quirk, like an unreliable uncle or a particularly bold wallpaper choice. Of course, the Victorian fascination with the supernatural isn't limited to shy footsteps and flickering candles. No evening is truly complete without someone producing a Ouija board or inviting over a famous medium. Seances are the social event du jour. Guests gather in the drawing room, clutching hands in the dark, waiting for messages from Great-Aunt Millicent, who was never much for conversation in life, but is now suspiciously chatty. The table trembles, the curtains billow, and if someone's cousin faints, well, that's half the entertainment. For many, the spirit world is more appealing than the mundane world of taxes and roast beef. After all, a haunted wardrobe is more interesting than another debate about drainage. It also provides excellent excuses. That odd stain on the carpet? A ghost, obviously. Lost your best cufflink? Surely the work of the mischievous child in grey who reportedly inhabits the linen closet. And if anyone challenges your grasp of French, simply blame it on a centuries-old curse from the house's first owner, who was rumoured to have fled Paris with more debts than teeth. Children grow up with stories of the family ghost, some genuinely afraid, others convinced it's just the butler in disguise, exacting silent revenge for all those emergency midnight requests. Pets, naturally, see right through the supernatural posturing. Cats ignore everything as a matter of principle, while dogs only bark at the ghosts on days ending in Y. Every so often, a new guest claims to have seen something no one else has, a lady in white gliding through the wall, or the unmistakable sound of ancient sobbing from the West Wing. The reports are always met with nods, murmurs of how interesting, and the unspoken challenge to top the tale at the next dinner party. If the supernatural fails to manifest, a strategically timed draft or a hidden string is more than enough to keep the legend alive. In the end, the ghosts serve the same purpose as most Victorian traditions. They bind the family together in a web of shared myth and competitive storytelling. They offer comfort. Someone's always watching over you. An outlet for drama, if you must faint, do it over a haunted candelabra, and a reason to keep the guest list rotating. No one wants to be haunted by the same house guests forever. So you settle in for another night, listening to the familiar creaks and sighs of your ancestral home. The ghost in the hallway rustles past, perhaps on its way to the pantry or simply out for a midnight stroll. You hope it finds peace, or at least a quieter spot to haunt, because, as any true Victorian knows, nothing ruins a restful night like a ghost with unresolved musical ambitions. So, as your eyes grow heavy, and the last carriage rumbles away into the London fog, let's take a moment to honour the truly bizarre marathon you've just survived. You managed to make it through the day without accidentally insulting a duke, fainting into your consommé, or being trampled by an escaped parlour monkey. You survived the endless meals, the armies of servants, the ever-present threat of social scandal, and enough cutlery to stock a small hardware store. It turns out that being filthy rich in Victorian London was a full-time job, a daily gauntlet of powdered noses, dangerous corsets, haunted wardrobes, and etiquette rules so complex they might actually be a form of psychological warfare. For every ounce of gold, there was a pound of anxiety. For every velvet cushion, there was a cousin scheming for your seat at dinner. Even the simplest pleasure, like a hot bath or a stroll in the park, came with so many layers of complication and actual clothing layers that you'd be forgiven for just hiding in your room and inventing nerves. But through it all, there's a weird kind of admiration to be found in these people, masters of surviving the world's most glamorous obstacle course. Their days were shaped by rules, rituals, and an unspoken agreement that no matter what disaster struck, be it bad weather, a botched dinner party, or a ghost in the hallway, You simply carried on, chin up, hat on, and hopefully, no gravy stains on your cravat. So tonight, as you tuck yourself into your soft, modern bed with hot water on tap, heating you can control without a footman, and the glorious freedom to wear, or not wear, whatever you want, maybe give a little nod to your Victorian ancestors. They survived soot, scandal, and soup that wobbled. They faced every challenge with determination, style, and a straight face, even when the dog was wearing a bow tie and the parlor was definitely haunted. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that humans are stubbornly adaptable and a little bit ridiculous. So be grateful for your dishwasher, your central heating, and the blessed absence of fainting couches. And as you drift off, remember, whatever your day held, at least you didn't have to explain 12 forks. Good night, and sleep well in the luxury of the present.